Rinkitink and Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 11, narrated by Ed Good. Rinkitink and Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 11. Zella Goes to Coregos. The forest in which Nikobob lived with his wife and daughter stood between the mountains and the city of Regos, and a well-beaten path wound among the trees, leading from the city to the mines. This path was used by the king's messengers, and captured prisoners were also sent by this way from Regos to work in the underground caverns. Nikobob had built his cabin more than a mile away from this path, that he might not be molested by the wild and lawless soldiers of King Goss. But the family of the charcoal burner was surrounded by many creatures scarcely less dangerous to encounter, and often in the night they could hear savage animals growling and prowling about the cabin. Because Nikobob minded his own business and never hunted the wild creatures to injure them, the beast had come to regard him as one of the natural dwellers in the forest, and did not molest him or his family. Still Zella and her mother seldom wandered far from home, except on such errands as carrying honey to Coregos, and at these times Nikobob cautioned them to be very careful. So when Zella set out on her journey to Queen Cor with the 2 pails of honey in her hands, she was undertaking a dangerous adventure, and there was no certainty that she would return safely to her loving parents. But they were poor, and Queen Cor's money, which they expected to receive for the honey, would enable them to purchase many things that were needed. So it was deemed best that Zella should go. She was a brave little girl, and poor people are often obliged to take chances that rich ones are spared. A passing woodchopper had brought news to Nikobob's cabin that Queen Cor had made a prisoner of the conquering prince of Pingaree, and that Goz and his warriors were again back in their city of Regos. But these struggles and conquests were matters which, however interesting, did not concern the poor charcoal burner or his family. They were more anxious over the report that the warriors had become more reckless than ever before, and delighted in annoying all the common people. So Zella was told to keep away from the beaten path as much as possible, that she might not encounter any of the king's soldiers.
"When it is necessary to choose between the warriors and the wild beasts," said
Nikobob,
"the beasts will be found the more merciful."
The little girl had put on her best attire for the journey, and her mother threw a blue silk shawl over her head and shoulders. Upon her feet were the pretty red shoes her father had brought her from Regos. Thus prepared, she kissed her parents good-bye and started out with a light heart, carrying the pails of honey in either hand. It was necessary for Zella to cross the path that led from the mines to the city, but once on the other side she was not likely to meet with anyone, for she had resolved to cut through the forest and so reach the bridge of boats without entering the city of Regos, where she might be interrupted. For an hour or 2 she found the walking easy enough, but then the forest, which in this part was unknown to her, became badly tangled. The trees were thicker, and creeping vines intertwined between them. She had to turn this way and that to get through it all, and finally she came to a place where a network of vines and branches effectually barred her farther progress. Zella was dismayed at first when she encountered this obstacle, but setting down her pails she made an endeavor to push the branches aside. At her touch they parted as if by magic, breaking asunder like dried twigs, and she found she could pass freely. At another place a great log had fallen across her way, but the little girl lifted it easily and cast it aside, although 6 ordinary men could scarcely have moved it. The child was somewhat worried at this evidence of a strength she had heretofore been ignorant that she possessed. In order to satisfy herself that it was no delusion, she tested her new-found power in many ways, finding that nothing was too big nor too heavy for her to lift. And naturally enough, the girl gained courage from these experiments, and became confident that she could protect herself in any emergency. When presently a wild boar ran toward her, grunting horribly and threatening her with its great tusks. She did not climb a tree to escape, as she had always done before on meeting such creatures, but stood still and faced the boar. When it had come quite close, and Zella saw that it could not injure her, a fact that astonished both the beast and the girl, she suddenly reached down, and seizing it by one ear, threw the great beast far off amongst the trees, where it fell headlong to the earth, grunting louder than ever with surprise and fear. The girl laughed merrily at this incident, and picking up her pails, resumed her journey through the forest. It is not recorded whether the wild boar told his adventure to the other beasts, or they had happened to witness his defeat, but certain it is that Zella was not again molested. A brown bear watched her pass without making any movement in her direction, and a great puma, a beast much dreaded by all men, crept out of her path as she approached, and disappeared among the trees. Thus everything favored the girl's journey, and she made such good speed that by noon she emerged from the forest's edge, and found that she was quite near to the bridge of boats that led to Coregos. This she crossed safely, and without meeting any of the rude warriors she so greatly feared, and 5 minutes later the daughter of the charcoal burner was seeking admittance at the back door of Queen Cor's palace. End of chapter 11. Rinkitink in Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 12, narrated by Ed Good. Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 12, The Excitement of Bilbil the Goat. Our story must now return to one of our characters whom we have been forced to neglect. The temper of Bilbil the goat was not sweet under any circumstances, and whenever he had a grievance he was inclined to be quite grumpy. So when his master settled down in the palace of King Goss for a quiet life with the boy prince, and passed his time in playing checkers and eating and otherwise enjoying himself, he had no use whatever for Bilbil, and shut the goat in an upstairs room to prevent his wandering through the city and quarreling with the citizens. But this Bilbil did not like at all. He became very cross and disagreeable at being left alone, and he did not speak nicely to the servants who came to bring him food. Therefore those people decided not to wait upon him any more, resenting his conversation and not liking to be scolded by a lean, scraggly goat, even though it belonged to a conqueror. The servants kept away from the room, and Bilbil grew more hungry and more angry every hour. He tried to eat the rugs and ornaments, but found them not at all nourishing. There was no grass to be had unless he escaped from the palace. When Queen Cor came to capture Inga and Rinkitink, both the prisoners were so filled with despair at their own misfortune that they gave no thought whatever to the goat, who was left in his room. Nor did Bilbil know anything of the changed fortunes of his comrades until he heard shouts and boisterous laughter in the courtyard below. Looking out of a window with the intention of rebuking those who dared thus to disturb him, Bilbil saw the courtyard quite filled with warriors, and knew from this that the palace had in some way again fallen into the hands of the enemy. Now, although Bilbil was often exceedingly disagreeable to King Rinkitink, as well as to the prince, and sometimes used harsh words in addressing them, he was intelligent enough to know them to be his friends, and to know that King Goss and his people were his foes. In sudden anger, provoked by the sight of the warriors and the knowledge that he was in the power of the dangerous men of Regos, Bilbil butted his head against the door of his room and burst it open. Then he ran to the head of the staircase and saw King Goss coming up the stairs, followed by a long line of his chief captains and warriors. The goat lowered his head, trembling with rage and excitement, and just as the king reached the top stair, the animal dashed forward and butted his majesty so fiercely that the big and powerful king, who did not expect an attack, doubled up and tumbled backward. His great weight knocked over the man just behind him, and he in turn struck the next warrior and upset him, so that in an instant the whole line of Bilbil's foes was tumbling heels over head to the bottom of the stairs, where they piled up in a heap, struggling and shouting, and in the mix-up hitting one another with their fists until every man of them was bruised and sore. Finally King Goss scrambled out of the heap and rushed up the stairs again, very angry indeed. Bilbil was ready for him, and a second time butted the king down the stairs. But now the goat also lost his balance and followed the king, landing full upon the confused heap of soldiers. Then he kicked out so viciously with his heels that he soon freed himself and dashed out of the doorway of the palace.
"Stop him!"
cried King Goss, running after. But the goat was now so wild and excited that it was not safe for anyone to stand in his way. None of the men were armed, and when one or two tried to head off the goat, Bilbil sent them sprawling upon the ground. Most of the warriors, however, were wise enough not to attempt to interfere with his flight. Coursing down the street, Bilbil found himself approaching the bridge of boats, and without pausing to think where it might lead him, he crossed over and proceeded on his way. A few moments later a great stone building blocked his path. It was the palace of Queen Cor, and seeing the gates of the courtyard standing wide open, Bilbil rushed through them without slackening his speed. End of chapter 12.
Rinkitink in Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 13, narrated by Kira Belkin, Highland Park, New Jersey. Rinkitink in Oz, by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 13, Zella Saves the Prince. The wicked Queen of Coregos was in a very bad humor this morning, for one of her slave drivers had come from the fields to say that a number of slaves had rebelled and would not work.
"Bring them here to me!"
she cried savagely.
"A good whipping may make them change their minds."
So the slave driver went to fetch the rebellious ones, and Queen Cor sat down to eat her breakfast, an ugly look on her face. Prince Inga had been ordered to stand behind his new mistress with a big fan of peacock's feathers. But he was so unused to such service that he awkwardly brushed her ear with the fan. At once she flew into a terrible rage, and slapped the prince twice with her hand blows that tingled too, for her hand was big and hard, and she was not inclined to be gentle. Inga took the blows without shrinking or uttering a cry, although they stung his pride far more than his body. But King Rinkitink, who was acting as the queen's butler and had just brought in her coffee, was so startled at seeing the young prince punished that he tipped over the urn, and the hot coffee streamed across the lap of the queen's best morning gown. Cor sprang from her seat with a scream of anger, and poor Rinkitink would doubtless have been given a terrible beating, had not the slave driver returned at this moment, and attracted the woman's attention. The overseer had brought with him all of the women slaves from Pingaree, who had been loaded down with chains and were so weak and ill they could scarcely walk, much less work in the fields. Prince Inga's eyes were dimmed with sorrowful tears when he discovered how his poor people had been abused. But his own plight was so helpless that he was unable to aid them. Fortunately, the boy's mother, Pingaree, was not among these slaves, for Queen Cor had placed her in the royal dairy to make butter.
"Why do you refuse to work?"
demanded Cor in a harsh voice, as the slaves from Pingaree stood before her, trembling and with downcast eyes.
"Because we lack strength to perform the tasks your overseers demand," answered
one of the women.
"Then you shall be whipped until your strength returns,"
exclaimed the queen. And turning to Inga, she commanded,
"Get me the whip with the 7 lashes."
As the boy left the room, wondering how he might manage to save the unhappy women from their undeserved punishment, he met a girl entering by the back way who asked,
"Can you tell me where to find Her Majesty Queen Cor?"
"She is in the chamber with the red dome, where green dragons are painted upon the walls,"
replied Inga.
"but she is in an angry and ungracious mood today." Why do you wish to see her?
I have honey to sell,
answered the girl, who was Zella, just come from the forest.
The queen is very fond of my honey.
You may go to her if you so desire,
said the boy,
but take care not to anger the cruel queen, or she may do you a mischief.
Why should she harm me who brings her the honey she so dearly loves?
inquired the child innocently.
But I thank you for your warning, and I will try not to anger the queen.
As Zella started to go, Inga's eyes suddenly fell upon her shoes, and instantly he recognized them as his own. For only in Pingaree were shoes shaped in this manner, high at the heel and pointed at the toes.
Stop!
He cried in an excited voice, and the girl obeyed wonderingly.
Tell me,
he continued, more gently,
where did you get those shoes?
My father brought them to me from Regos,
she answered.
From Regos?
Yes, are they not pretty?
asked Zella, looking down at her feet to admire them.
One of them my father found by the palace wall, and the other on an ash heap. So he brought them to me, and they fit me perfectly.
By this time Inga was trembling with eager joy, which of course the girl could not understand.
What is your name, little maid?
he asked.
I am called Zella, and my father is Nicobob, the charcoal burner.
Zella is a pretty name. I am Inga, Prince of Pingaree,
said he.
And the shoes you are now wearing, Zella, belong to me. They were not cast away as your father supposed, but were lost. Will you let me have them again?
Zella's eyes filled with tears.
Must I give up my pretty shoes, then?
she asked.
They are the only ones I have ever owned.
Inga was sorry for the poor child, but he knew how important it was that he regain possession of the magic pearls, so he said pleadingly,
Please let me have them, Zella. See, I will exchange for them the shoes I now have on, which are newer and prettier than the others.
The girl hesitated. She wanted to please the boy prince, yet she hated to exchange the shoes which her father had brought her as a present.
If you will give me the shoes,
continued the boy anxiously,
I will promise to make you and your father and mother rich and prosperous. Indeed, I will promise to grant any favors you may ask of me.
And he sat down upon the floor and drew off the shoes he was wearing and held them toward the girl.
I'll see if they will fit me,
said Zella, taking off her left shoe, the one that contained the pink pearl, and beginning to put on one of Inga's. Just then Queen Cor, angry at being made to wait for her whip with the 7 lashes, rushed into the room to find Inga. Seeing the boy sitting upon the floor beside Zella, the woman sprang toward him to beat him with her clenched fists. But Inga had now slipped on the shoe, and the queen's blows could not reach his body. Then Cor espied the whip lying beside Inga, and snatching it up, she tried to lash him with it, all to no avail. While Zella sat horrified by this scene, the prince, who realized he had no time to waste, reached out and pulled the right shoe from the girl's foot, quickly placing it upon his own. Then he stood up and, facing the furious but astonished queen, said to her in a quiet voice,
Madam, please give me that whip.
I won't,
answered Cor.
I'm going to lash those Pingaree women with it.
The boy seized hold of the whip, and with irresistible strength drew it from the queen's hand. But she drew from her bosom a sharp dagger, and with the swiftness of lightning aimed a blow at Inga's heart. He merely stood still and smiled, for the blade rebounded and fell clattering to the floor. Then at last Queen Cor understood the magic power that had terrified her husband, but which she had ridiculed in her ignorance, not believing in it. She did not know that Inga's power had been lost and found again, but she realized the boy was no common foe, and that unless she could still manage to outwit him, her reign in the island of Coregos was ended. To gain time, she went back to the red domed chamber and seated herself in her throne, before which were grouped the weeping slaves from Pingaree. Inga had taken Zella's hand and assisted her to put on the shoes he had given her in exchange for his own. She found them quite comfortable, and did not know she had lost anything by the transfer.
Come with me,
then, said the boy prince. and led her into the presence of Queen Cor, who was giving Rinkitink a scolding. To the overseer, Inga said,
"Give me the keys which unlock these chains, that I may set these poor women at liberty."
"Don't you do it!"
screamed Queen Cor.
"If you interfere, madam,"
said the boy,
"I will put you into a dungeon."
By this, Rinkitink knew that Inga had recovered his magic pearls, and the little fat king was so overjoyed that he danced and capered all around the room. But the queen was alarmed at the threat, and the slave driver, fearing the conqueror of Regos, tremblingly gave up the keys. Inga quickly removed all the shackles from the women of his country, and comforted them, telling them they should work no more, but would soon be restored to their homes in Pingaree. Then he commanded the slave driver to go and get all the children who had been made slaves, and to bring them to their mothers. The man obeyed and left at once to perform his errand, while Queen Cor, growing more and more uneasy, suddenly sprang from her throne, and before Inga could stop her, had rushed through the room and out into the courtyard of the palace, meaning to make her escape. Rinkitink followed her, running as fast as he could go. It was at this moment that Bilbil, in his mad dash from Regos, turned in at the gates of the courtyard, and as he was coming one way, and Queen Cor was going the other, they bumped into each other with great force. The woman sailed through the air, over Bilbil's head, and landed on the ground outside the gates, where her crown rolled into a ditch, and she picked herself up half-dazed, and continued her flight. Bilbil was also somewhat dazed by the unexpected encounter, but he continued his rush rather blindly, and so struck poor Rinkitink, who was chasing after Queen Cor. They rolled over one another a few times, and then Rinkitink sat up, and Bilbil sat up, and they looked at each other in amazement.
"Bilbil,"
said the king.
"I'm astonished at you."
"Your Majesty,"
said Bilbil.
"I expected kinder treatment at your hands."
"You interrupted me,"
said Rinkitink.
"There was plenty of room without your taking my path,"
declared the goat. And then Inga came running out and said,
"Where is the queen?"
"Gone,"
replied Rinkitink.
"but she cannot go far, as this is an island. However, I have found Bilbil, and our party is again reunited. You have recovered your magic powers, and again we are masters of the situation, so let us be thankful."
Saying this, the good little king got upon his feet and limped back into the throne room to help comfort the women. Presently, the children of Pingaree, who had been gathered together by the overseer, were brought in and restored to their mothers. And there was great rejoicing among them, you may be sure.
"But where is Queen Garee, my dear mother?"
questioned Inga. But the women did not know, and it was some time before the overseer remembered that one of the slaves from Pingaree had been placed in the royal dairy. Perhaps this was the woman the boy was seeking. Inga at once commanded him to lead the way to the butter-house. But when they arrived there, Queen Garee was nowhere in the place, although the boy found a silk scarf which he recognized as one that his mother used to wear. Then they began a search throughout the island of Coregos, but could not find Inga's mother anywhere. When they returned to the palace of Queen Cor, Rinkitink discovered that the bridge of boats had again been removed, separating them from Regos, and from this they suspected that Queen Cor had fled to her husband's island and taken Queen Garee with her. Inga was much perplexed what to do, and returned with his friends to the palace to talk the matter over. Zella was now crying because she had not sold her honey, and was unable to return to her parents on the island of Regos. But the boy prince comforted her, and promised she should be protected until she could be restored to her home. Rinkitink found Queen Cor's purse, which she had had no time to take with her, and gave Zella several gold pieces for the honey. Then Inga ordered the palace servants to prepare a feast for all the women and children of Pingaree, and to prepare them beds in the great palace, which was large enough to accommodate them all. Then the boy and the goat and Rinkitink and Zella went into a private room to consider what should be done next. End of chapter 13.
Rinkitink in Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 14, narrated by Kalinda. Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 14, The Escape.
Our fault,
said Rinkitink,
is that we conquer only one of these twin islands at a time. When we conquered Regos, our foes all came to Coregos, and now that we have conquered Coregos, the queen has fled to Regos, and each time they removed the bridge of boats so that we could not follow them.
What has become of our own boat in which we came from Pingaree?
asked Bilbil.
We left it on the shore of Regos,
replied the prince.
But I wonder if we could not get it again.
Why don't you ask the White Pearl?
suggested Rinkitink.
That is a good idea,
returned the boy, and at once he drew the white pearl from its silken bag and held it to his ear. Then he asked,
How may I regain our boat?
The voice of the pearl replied,
Go to the south end of the island of Coregos, and clap your hands 3 times, and the boat will come to you.
Very good,
cried Inga, and then he turned to his companions and said,
We shall be able to get our boat whenever we please. But what then shall we do?
Take me home in it, pleaded Zella.
Come with me to my city of Gilgad,
said the king,
where you will be very welcome to remain forever.
No,
answered Inga.
I must rescue my father and mother, as well as my people. Already I have the women and children of Pingaree, but the men are with my father in the mines of Regos, and my dear mother has been taken away by Queen Cor. Not until all are rescued will I consent to leave these islands.
Quite right,
exclaimed Bilbil.
On second thought,
said Rinkitink,
I agree with you. If you are careful to sleep in your shoes and never take them off again, I believe you will be able to perform the task you have undertaken.
They counseled together for a long time as to their mode of action, and it was finally considered best to make the attempt to liberate King Kitticut first of all, and with him the men from Pingaree. This would give them an army to assist them, and afterward they could march to Regos and compel Queen Cor to give up the Queen of Pingaree. Zella told them that they could go in their boat along the shore of Regos to a point opposite the mines, thus avoiding any conflict with the warriors of King Goss. This being considered the best course to pursue, they resolved to start on the following morning, as night was even now approaching. The servants being all busy in caring for the women and children, Zella undertook to get a dinner for Inga and Rinkitink and herself, and soon prepared a fine meal in the palace kitchen, for she was a good little cook, and had often helped her mother. The dinner was served in a small room overlooking the gardens, and Rinkitink thought the best part of it was the sweet honey, which he spread upon the biscuits that Zella had made. As for Bilbil, he wandered through the palace grounds and found some grass that made him a good dinner. During the evening, Inga talked with the women and cheered them, promising soon to reunite them with their husbands who were working in the mines, and to send them back to their own island of Pingaree. Next morning the boy rose bright and early and found that Zella had already prepared a nice breakfast, and after the meal they went to the most southern point of the island, which was not very far away, Rinkitink riding upon Bilbil's back, and Inga and Zella following behind them, hand in hand. When they reached the water's edge, the boy advanced and clapped his hands together 3 times, as the White Pearl had told him to do, and in a few moments they saw in the distance the black boat with the silver lining, coming swiftly toward them from the sea. Presently it grounded on the beach, and they all got into it. Zella was delighted with the boat, which was the most beautiful she had ever seen, and the marvel of its coming to them through the water, without anyone to row it, made her a little afraid of the fairy craft. But Inga picked up the oars and began to row, and at once the boat shot swiftly in the direction of Regos. They rounded the point of that island where the city was built, and noticed that the shore was lined with warriors, who had discovered their boat, but seemed undecided whether to pursue it or not. This was probably because they had received no commands what to do, or perhaps they had learned to fear the magic powers of these adventurers from Pingaree, and were unwilling to attack them unless their king ordered them to. The coast on the western side of the island of Regos was very uneven, and Zella, who knew fairly well the location of the mines from the inland forest path, was puzzled to decide which mountain they now viewed from the sea was the one where the entrance to the underground caverns was located. First she thought it was this peak, and then she guessed it was that, so considerable time was lost through her uncertainty. They finally decided to land and explore the country, to see where they were, so Inga ran the boat into a little rocky cove, where they all disembarked. For an hour they searched for the path without finding any trace of it, and now Zella believed they had gone too far to the north, and must return to another mountain that was nearer to the city. Once again they entered the boat, and followed the winding coast south until they thought they had reached the right place. By this time, however, it was growing dark, for the entire day had been spent in the search for the entrance to the mines, and Zella had warned them that it would be safer to spend the night in the boat than on land, where wild beasts were sure to disturb them. None of them realized at this time how fatal this day of search had been to their plans, and perhaps if Inga had realized what was going on, he would have landed and fought all the wild beasts in the forest rather than quietly remain in the boat until morning. However, knowing nothing of the cunning plans of Queen Cor and King Goss, they anchored their boat in a little bay and cheerfully ate their dinner, finding plenty of food and drink in the boat's lockers. In the evening the stars came out in the sky and tipped the waves around their boat with silver. All around them was delightfully still, save for the occasional snarl of a beast on the neighbouring shore. They talked together quietly of their adventures and their future plans, and Zella told them her simple history, and how hard her poor father was obliged to work, burning charcoal to sell for enough money to support his wife and child. Nikobob might be the humblest man in all Regos, but Zella declared he was a good man, and honest, and it was not his fault that his country was ruled by so wicked a king. Then Rinkitink, to amuse them, offered to sing a song, and although Bilbil protested in his gruff way, claiming that his master's voice was cracked and disagreeable, the little king was encouraged by the others to sing his song, which he did.
A red-headed man named Ned was dead, sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo. In battle he had lost his head, sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo. Alas, poor Ned, to him I said, how did you lose your head so red, sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo. Said Ned, I for my country bled, sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo. Instead of dying safe in bed, sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo. If I had only fled instead, I then had been ahead. Sing fiddle-cum-faddle-cum-fee-doo, I said to Ned.
Do stop, your majesty,
pleaded Bilbil.
You're making my head ache.
But the song isn't finished,
replied Rinkitink.
And as for your head aching, think of poor Ned, who hadn't any head at all.
I can think of nothing but your dismal singing,
retorted Bilbil.
Why didn't you choose a cheerful subject instead of telling how a man who was dead lost his red head? Really, Rinkitink, I'm surprised at you.
I know a splendid song about a live man,
said the king.
Then don't sing it,
begged Bilbil. Zella was both astonished and grieved by the disrespectful words of the goat, for she had quite enjoyed Rinkitink's singing, and had been taught a proper respect for kings and those high in authority. But as it was now getting late, they decided to go to sleep, that they might rise early the following morning. So they all reclined upon the bottom of the big boat, and covered themselves with blankets which they found stored underneath the seats for just such occasions. They were not long in falling asleep, and did not waken until daybreak. After a hurried breakfast, for Inga was eager to liberate his father, the boy rowed the boat ashore, and they all landed and began searching for the path. Zella found it within the next half-hour, and declared they must be very close to the entrance to the mines. So they followed the path toward the north, Inga going first, and then Zella following him, while Rinkitink brought up the rear, riding upon Bilbil's back. Before long they saw a great wall of rock towering before them, in which was a low arched entrance, and on either side of this entrance stood a guard, armed with a sword and spear. The guards of the mines were not so fierce as the warriors of King Goss, their duty being to make the slaves work at their tasks and guard them from escaping. But they were as cruel as their cruel master wished them to be, and as cowardly as they were cruel. Inga walked up to the two men at the entrance and said,
"Does this opening lead to the mines of King Goss?"
"It does,"
replied one of the guards.
"but no one is allowed to pass out who once goes in."
"Nevertheless,"
said the boy,
"we intend to go in, and we shall come out whenever it pleases us to do so. I am the Prince of Pingaree, and I have come to liberate my people, whom King Goss has enslaved."
Now when the two guards heard this speech, they looked at one another and laughed, and one of them said,
"The king was right, for he said the boy was likely to come here, and that he would try to set his people free. Also the king commanded that we must keep the little prince in the mines and set him to work, together with his companions." "Then let us obey the king,"
replied the other man. Inga was surprised at hearing this, and asked,
"When did King Goss give you this order?"
"His Majesty was here in person last night,"
replied the man,
"and went away again but an hour ago. He suspected you were coming here, and told us to capture you if we could."
This report made the boy very anxious, not for himself but for his father, for he feared the king was up to some mischief. So he hastened to enter the mines, and the guards did nothing to oppose him or his companions, their orders being to allow him to go in, but not to come out. The little group of adventurers passed through a long rocky corridor, and reached a low, wide cavern, where they found 12 guards and 100 slaves, the latter being hard at work with picks and shovels, digging for gold, while the guards stood over them with long whips. Inga found many of the men from Pingaree among these slaves, but King Kitticut was not in this cavern, so they passed through it and entered another corridor that led to a second cavern. Here also hundreds of men were working, but the boy did not find his father amongst them, and so went on to a third cavern. The corridors all slanted downward, so that the farther they went, the lower into the earth they descended, and now they found the air hot and close and difficult to breathe. Flaming torches were stuck into the walls to give light to the workers, and these added to the oppressive heat. The third and lowest cavern was the last in the mines, and here were many scores of slaves and many guards to keep them at work. So far, none of the guards had paid any attention to Inga's party, but allowed them to proceed as they would. And while the slaves cast curious glances at the boy and girl and man and goat, they dared say nothing. But now the boy walked up to some of the men of Pingaree and asked news of his father, telling them not to fear the guards, as he would protect them from the whips. Then he beamed that King Kitticut had indeed been working in this very cavern until the evening before, when King Goss had come and taken him away, still loaded with chains.
"Seems to me,"
said King Rinkitink when he heard this report,
"that Goss has carried your father away to Regos, to prevent us from rescuing him. He may hide poor Kitticut in a dungeon, where we cannot find him."
"Perhaps you are right,"
answered the boy,
"but I am determined to find him, wherever he may be."
Inga spoke firmly and with courage, but he was greatly disappointed to find that King Goss had been before him at the mines and had taken his father away. However, he tried not to feel disheartened, believing he would succeed in the end in spite of all opposition. Turning to the guards, he said,
"Remove the chains from these slaves and set them free."
The guards laughed at this order, and one of them brought forward a handful of chains, saying,
"His Majesty has commanded us to make you also a slave, for you are never to leave these caverns again."
Then he attempted to place the chains on Inga, but the boy indignantly seized them and broke them apart as easily as if they had been cotton cords. When 12 or more of the guards made a dash to capture him, the prince swung the end of the chain like a whip and drove them into a corner, where they cowered and begged for mercy. Stories of the marvelous strength of the boy prince had already spread to the mines of Regos, and although King Goss had told them that Inga had been deprived of all his magic power, the guards now saw that this was not true, so they deemed it wise not to attempt to oppose him. The chains of the slaves had all been riveted fast to their ankles and wrists, but Inga broke the bonds of steel with his hands and set the poor man free. Not only those from Pingaree, but all who had been captured in the many wars and raids of King Goss. They were very grateful, as you may suppose, and agreed to support Prince Inga in whatever action he commanded. He led them to the middle cavern, where all the guards and overseers fled in terror at his approach, and soon he had broken apart the chains of the slaves who had been working in that part of the mines. Then they approached the first cavern, and liberated all there. The slaves had been treated so cruelly by the servants of King Goss that they were eager to pursue and slay them in revenge. But Inga held them back, and formed them into companies, each company having its own leader. Then he called the leaders together and instructed them to march in good order along the path to the city of Regos, where he would meet them and tell them what to do next. They readily agreed to obey him, and arming themselves with iron bars and pickaxes which they brought from the mines, the slaves began their march to the city. Zella at first wished to be left behind, that she might make her way to her home, but neither Rinkitink nor Inga thought it was safe for her to wander alone through the forest, so they induced her to return with them to the city. The boy beached his boat this time at the same place as when he first landed at Regos, and while many of the warriors stood on the shore and before the walls of the city, not one of them attempted to interfere with the boy in any way. Indeed, they seemed uneasy and anxious, and when Inga met Captain Buzzub, the boy asked if anything had happened in his absence.
"A great deal has happened,"
replied Buzzub.
"Our king and queen have run away and left us, and we don't know what to do."
"Run away?"
exclaimed Inga.
"Where did they go to?"
"Who knows?"
said the man, shaking his head despondently.
"They departed together a few hours ago in a boat with 40 rowers, and they took with them the king and queen of Pingaree."
End of chapter 14.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 15 narrated by Ed Good. Rinkitink and Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 15. The Flight of the Rulers. Now it seems that when Queen Cor fled from her island to Regos, she had wit enough, although greatly frightened, to make a stop at the royal dairy, which was near to the bridge, and to drag poor Pingaree from the butter house and across to Regos with her. The warriors of King Goss had never before seen the terrible Queen Cor frightened, and therefore when she came running across the bridge of boats, dragging the Queen of Pingaree after her by one arm, the woman's great fright had the effect of terrifying the waiting warriors.
"Quick!"
cried Cor.
"Destroy the bridge, or we are lost!"
While the men were tearing away the bridge of boats, the Queen ran up to the palace of Goss, where she met her husband.
"That boy is a wizard!"
she gasped.
"There is no standing against him."
"Oh, have you discovered his magic at last?"
replied Goss, laughing in her face.
"Who now is the coward?"
"Don't laugh!"
cried Queen Cor.
"It is no laughing matter. Both our islands are as good as conquered this very minute. What shall we do, Goss?"
"Come in,"
he said, growing serious,
"and let us talk it over."
So they went into a room of the palace and talked long and earnestly.
"The boy intends to liberate his father and mother and all the people of Pingaree, and to take them back to their island,"
said Cor.
"He may also destroy our palaces and make us his slaves. I can see but one way, Goss, to prevent him from doing all this, and whatever else he pleases to do."
"What way is that?"
asked King Goss.
We must take the boy's parents away from here as quickly as possible. I have with me the Queen of Pingaree, and you can run up to the mines and get the king. Then we will carry them away in a boat and hide them where the boy cannot find them with all his magic. We will use the King and Queen of Pingaree as hostages, and send word to the boy wizard that if he does not go away from our islands and allow us to rule them undisturbed in our own way, we will put his father and mother to death. Also we will say that as long as we are let alone, his parents will be safe, although still safely hidden. I believe, Goss, that in this way we can compel Prince Inga to obey us, for he seems very fond of his parents.
It isn't a bad idea,
said Goss reflectively.
But where can we hide the king and queen so that the boy cannot find them?
In the country of the Nome King on the mainland away at the south,
she replied.
The gnomes are our friends, and they possess magic powers that will enable them to protect the prisoners from discovery. If we can manage to get the King and Queen of Pingaree to the Nome Kingdom before the boy knows what we are doing, I am sure our plot will succeed.
Goss gave the plan considerable thought in the next 5 minutes, and the more he thought about it, the more clever and reasonable it seemed. So he agreed to do as Queen Cor suggested, and at once hurried away to the mines, where he arrived before Prince Inga did. The next morning, he carried King Kitticut back to Regos. While Goss was gone, Queen Cor busied herself in preparing a large and swift boat for the journey. She placed in it several bags of gold and jewels which with to bribe the gnomes, and selected 40 of the strongest oarsmen in Regos to row the boat. The instant King Goss returned with his royal prisoner, all was ready for departure. They quickly entered the boat with their 2 important captives, and without a word of explanation to any of their people, they commanded the oarsmen to start, and were soon out of sight upon the broad expanse of the Nonestic Ocean. Inga arrived at the city some hours later, and was much distressed when he learned that his father and mother had been spirited away from the islands.
I shall follow them, of course,
said the boy to Rinkitink.
And if I cannot overtake them on the ocean, I will search the world over until I find them. But before I leave here, I must arrange to send our people back to Pingaree.
End of chapter 15.